Ladies and gentlemen, we got a special one for you today, Matt Geiger and Aussie Cossack. So Matt and I will be asking questions to Aussie. And first, Aussie, first of all, thank you for coming on the show. You know, we've been trying to get this together, but I've been on the road and but here we are. And before I ask you the questions about politics, World War III, what do you think might happen? Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you are, how long you've been there, and why, so they kind of get to know you.
Sure, thanks, Vlad. Matt, great to speak with you. So I'm born in Australia. My great-grandparents are buried in Australia, but we come from the Zabaikal region, the Far East Russian Cossack region, and we left the Russian Empire in the Russian Civil War, fighting against the communists. We were for the Tsar, the Cossacks. A lot of them were killed. A lot of them left the country. So my ancestors made their way to Australia, and this is where I grew up. Born in the family of a Russian Orthodox priest, and once I turned 18, I was sent to Moscow to study at the Sretinsky Moscow Seminary. And upon returning to Australia, I got involved in the construction game, but continued conducting activities which were of a Russian, you could say, patriotic nature. Ran a Russian newspaper for 6 years. We had the Cossacks in Australia. And when lockdowns and COVID started, that's when I sort of started to move into the journalist space, because Australia needed a pushback and needed help to fight against police and government intimidation. And that's when this sort of Aussie Cossack brand was called. Now people call me Cossack, but the Aussie was on there because I was born in Australia. I'm an Australian citizen. The media first came up with that name, Aussie Cossack. And they saw me as a bit of a ringleader who was getting the people to rise up against what was happening in Australia. If you remember back in the days of lockdowns and COVID, Australia was pretty strict on that. Probably one of the strictest countries in the world. And I think we won. We successfully pushed back against the police and government intimidation tactics, similar to what you guys were experiencing in the United States. And then, of course, remaining unvaccinated, I got on the radar of the police. I was arrested like 40 times. All these arrests were live on YouTube. Had a great YouTube channel, Aussie Cossack, 170,000 subscribers before they took it down for medical misinformation. But of course, the things we were talking about now it turned out to be true. The governments themselves admit that what we were saying was correct. And was forced off YouTube, moved into sort of Telegram, Twitter area. It'd be nice to get YouTube page back because it's a good platform, but unfortunately a lot of censorship on there. Then the Russian special military operation started in February 2022. And the police had already been persecuting me for a long time because they saw me as a bit of a ringleader, promoting anti-government sentiment, as they accused me of, and riling up the crowds. And in a small country of 27 million people, when you can reach 5 to 10 million people a week, that's a lot of people you're reaching out of the population of Australia. So the police then started looking at me more as a threat, not only as a person who was fighting against government lockdown intimidation tactics, but now as a person who's pro-Russian. And of course, I fully backed Russia on February the 24th, 2022, when Russia started the special military operation. And I was imprisoned just a few months after the special operation started. They got me on a technicality. I named a person who was the subject of a suppression order, non-publication order. Literally, I named a pedophile, exposed his name, and the government decided to go all in on me and crack down using that technicality. They gave me a 10-month sentence as a national security interest. Of course, gave me the very strict, hard treatment, sent me to the hardest prisons, maximum security, orange overalls, legs shackled, arms shackled. But of course, the offense that I committed wasn't even that serious. When just I dropped a name on YouTube, big deal. So live on YouTube, dropped this guy's name. He's actually before the courts, and he's going to be facing court next month in September. That's going to be a big thing, so stay tuned for that. And I won the appeal, got out of jail, thanks to help from the Russian government. This is interesting. While I was in jail, the Russian government actually intervened and demanded that Australia release me, even though I was only an Australian citizen back then. Once I was released from jail, I only lasted about a month or two on the outside free before I was arrested when trying to leave Australia to Russia, tried to get out of here. And they stitched me up. About 20 or 30 or so Ukrainian protesters were protesting. I saw them. I started live streaming them to YouTube. One of them grabbed me, pushed me, grabbed my arm, and I pushed them back as self-defense. The police end up arresting me, take away my Australian passport, so I can't leave the country. And then they released me, only to then put another warrant for my arrest to serve the rest of the parole from the suppression order. And I just said, look, I've had enough of this. I'm handing myself in to the Russians, drove straight to the Russian consulate in Sydney, handed myself in. The Russians said, yep, welcome, thank you very much, you can stay. And I've been here now since the 14th of December 2022. It's more than 600 days. It'll be 2 years coming up at the end of this year. I've remained inside the Russian consulate building ever since. So there's the story of the Aussie Cossack.
Yeah, that is. I remember back when, especially in 2021, when Biden, won the election here in America and got in, and they were doing that here, and we thought we had it tough, but the videos we were seeing from Australia were just ridiculous. And so you're pretty much a political prisoner.
Yeah, I think I'm a political prisoner. I agree with that, 100%.
Yeah, because if you leave the consulate, what's going to happen? You're going to be in handcuffs. So you can't go there. You can't leave the building. Yeah, you got Wi-Fi and stuff like that, but in a voice. But still, you're locked to a place. Matt, before we get over to, the other more political questions, you have any questions for Aussie at this moment?
Did you ask me something? Sorry, it cut out there right at the end.
I'm saying if you got a question for Aussie before we go on to the next segment.
Yeah, Aussie, awesome to meet you, man. Like, I was one of those people that was watching your videos at that time, and it was a time where so many people were so confused. People didn't know what was going on. No one knew what to believe. And here you are in your house getting arrested. The police, barging in your door, breaking in the door. I just want to tell you, man, you're one of my heroes. Like, straight up, man, you're one of my absolute favorite people, because I think at that time, it's easier to stand up now. It's easier to be like, oh, we have more of the information. You're doing it at the time, and you laid it on the line. And I'm a big believer in local action, right? I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. And I got a kick-ass group of people that are going down to the board of supervisors, these corrupt, we don't call it Maricopa County, we call it Corruption County, because they're all scum. And you're doing this before it was cool. So I just give you the ultimate, you're ahead of the curve. And I think one time you said, hey, I want to be president of Australia. I think you could pull that off, man. I think you should be.
Thank you, Matt. Well, we'll have to make Australia a republic first. At the moment, we've got a prime minister. But
who knows what get your guns back.
Yeah, who knows what could happen. Look, Arizona, Florida, Texas, all of these sort of freedom-loving states in America, they were always very sympathetic to what was happening in Australia. That's where we formed a lot of bonds and connections with people like yourself when you guys saw what was happening in Australia. And the Australians knew that they had allies and supporters in the United States. And I think we still do, and we have to keep going on that. I mean, the government is afraid when we collaborate. All of our governments are afraid. Australia, United States government, when freedom fighters collaborate internationally. So it's great to chat with you. And yes, I have been to Arizona once. There's a desert there's a desert in Arizona, and there's an Orthodox monastery in the desert. Maybe you know about it. I've been there, visited it. It's quite
What's it called?
I can't
remember what it's called. Yeah, but anyway, that's just on a side note.
Well, I just appreciate everything you've done over the years, and like I said, you were doing it before it was cool. And I think a lot of people, especially my friends, have generated inspiration from many people. And I think one of those people is you. So thank you. Thank you for leading the charge. I think your name will go down in the history books.
Thank you for your kind words. I don't think I did anything exceptional. It was just the reaction to what the police were doing. I mean, what was the interesting factor that was about those videos that you were saying from Australia was the live interactions with the police. I mean, the police would pull me over or search me or stop me or arrest me almost every day just to target me because we were leading big protests against the government, and they were trying to target ringleaders. And those videos, of course, went viral, and quite a strong United States audience. And I think those videos with the police, when you speak to police and you show no fear and you showed no, you could say, effect in light of their intimidation tactics, you don't give them any response. You turn it into a humorous situation. You laugh at them, but without swearing or being obnoxious.
Right.
Just to handle them with humor, peacefully. People love to see that. It also gives people hope. It demoralizes the police. It demoralizes the government. At the moment, police recruiting levels are at their lowest ever, and military recruiting levels are at the lowest level ever, because people simply don't want to serve their governments anymore. People don't want to be part of this cabal and protect the cabal. Same thing in the United States and Australia, by the way. And I think Trump was talking about it just yesterday, that there's an all-time low in military recruitment, and he wants to bring that back up because people simply don't want to. It's not about defending their country or serving their country. I'm sure people are patriotic, but it's about defending or serving those people in the White House. And people don't want to serve Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. There's no desire to go and risk their lives in foreign conflicts. And same thing in Australia. After the lockdowns, after what the government was doing, the police were doing on government orders, many police simply resigned. And I've been approached by a lot of former police, even current police, that's actually say to me, you know what, we were actually always on your side. We were hoping you guys would keep going and pushing, because the government was also forcing the police themselves and their families to get injected. And the police realized, the smart police realized that it's a bad thing. A lot of them just resigned, and they never went back to the force. So in that sense, it's very similar to what's happening in the United States and Australia at the moment.
How do you fix it? How do you think you can even fix Australia? It's almost like their whole police force is corrupt. At least in the United States, you have a lot of, I would say most people are, most officers are Trump supporters. Whereas in Australia, these guys are doing outrageous. How do you fix that? Can you fix it?
Well, I mean, there's no patriotism in Australia anymore. One of the good things about the United States is you have a patriotic movement.
Right.
You have leaders like Trump. You have hope. In Australia, there are no leaders. There are no opposition leaders. There are no up-and-coming leaders. There's nothing. Australia is just treading water in terms of ideology. Australia doesn't promote patriotism to Australia anymore for many years. It's been replaced by woke ideology and this woke lobby, which is present in all forms of government, local, state, and federal. It sees patriotism as a threat. I'm talking about Australian nationalism or Australian patriotism, to have pride in Australia, the Australian flag. The Australian flag is shunned. It's banned in many places. It's considered offensive by some people. And instead of marches, military marches commemorating Australian Army, commemorating the Anzacs, we have other types of marches which are promoting unhealthy concepts to children, against families, against family values. And Australia, in that regard, is going down the ideological gurgler. Oh, it's all well and good to have freedom and people can do what they like, but the country is facing a crisis. And you can see through the caliber of the politicians that are being elected to Parliament, the type of politicians who are being elected. The Australian right is in disarray. The Liberal Party is very disorganised. The Labor Party in Australia is being supported by the Greens, and they're quite strong. And they're all about do whatever you like, forget about God, forget about country, forget about family, forget about your history, and they have no future. And these are the type of people who end up poisoning the population. More people are suffering from mental health because of these type of things. More people are committing suicide. More people are losing hope in life, losing hope in their families. children are growing up being ideologically poisoned by this system, by the woke education system in Australia. Probably one of the states in the United States which are most affected by this, probably California. I think places like that, where this type of ideology is spreading. And then you've got serious countries like China who are watching this and laughing and watching the West implode on itself and destroy itself, where the West is becoming weaker and weaker. And serious countries like China becoming stronger, and economically, ideologically, morally, that's a big problem. And we look at the decline of any great empire, it always coincides with a moral decline, whether it be the Romans or the Greeks or the Babylonians or whatever it is. There's always a moral factor. And this is what I think the West is going through at the moment, which is why a lot of people are very interested to move to Russia, which is what I wanted to do and I tried to do, and I was picked up and arrested, intercepted. But I suppose I have moved to Russia because I'm on Russian territory in Sydney, Australia. But still, from the legal perspective, I'm still on Russian land, which is great because the police can't touch me, the government can't get me. I can continue broadcasting, and the standoff continues.
I wanted this big shout out. Me and Matt were just talking about this by Pastor Jonathan Cahn, The Return of the Gods. When you take out God from society, you can even make it a atheist society. They always go down the same rabbit hole. It is gender bending. It is abortion on demand. There's no right. There's no wrong. You have your truth. I have mine. So what you just said, the book I'm like almost done with, he goes back to the Roman Empire, to the Israelites, like Old Testament, New Testament, and now with America and the West as a whole, where we were 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, and today. They wanted to make it a free society. We're not pushing God down anyone's throat, but there's also a spiritual world. And those evil demons of the past, they came in just a new form, right? Before the bull was like a place to sacrifice your children. Well, now on Wall Street, what do we have? A 16-foot long, 10-foot tall bull, again, right in the heart of the nation. And people don't bring their children to them. They go to Planned Parenthood, right? They mock the same spirits, replace God when you kick them out. They do make themselves more modern, right? To hide. But exactly what you're saying. And
they like to use symbolism. It's very important, these satanic forces. Look, we saw what happened in the French Olympic ceremony. The mocking of Jesus, the mocking of the Last Supper. God shall not be mocked. And people then wonder why the Western society is declining and decaying. I mean, when you had countries like Iran, a Muslim country like Iran, denouncing the French opening ceremony and sticking up for Christians. That's another problem, that a lot of the Christian churches around the world are becoming weaker and weaker. I'm not talking about Christianity in itself, because maybe you could say there's an argument that Christianity actually flourishes in times of persecution historically in the last 1,000 years. I'm talking about the administration, the civilian administration of these Christian churches. Statistically, they're losing. Australia, the churches are being sold off, turned into restaurants, bars. It's really sad. Nightclubs, people have stopped going to church. It's a very sad thing. And there's a trend in the West where Western media, big Western organizations, big tech allow this. By the way, big tech is a big problem. They allow the mocking of Christianity. They allow blasphemy against Christianity. Whereas if you did the same type of blasphemy against the Jewish faith or Muslim faith, you wouldn't be allowed to. It would be considered hate speech. It would be banned and suspended. So they're really targeting Christianity. And unfortunately, we have less and less Christian leaders in the West. Now, when we're in Christian leader, I'm not so much talking or looking, hoping for somebody to be a Christian leader as a personal example of a good person or pious person, right? I'm talking about someone can be a ratbag, someone can be a bad guy, but at least they stick up for Christianity on a scale of their government, on a scale of their country, on a scale of their people. And I think one of the only leaders in the planet right now, which the Christian world really is all looking to, if you're a genuine Christian and you care about the future of Christianity, then you will realize that the only defender, the only leader in the world, I'll let you guess who it is, you probably know, is Vladimir Putin. He's the only one who's holding the line. He's sticking up for family values and Christian values. And by the way, it doesn't mean it's to the detriment of the other religions. In Russia, there's no problems between the religions, between different religions. People get along well. Even Russians aren't anti-Semitic. They're not anti-Islamic. Everyone seems to get along in Russia. It's a big country, fighting a war. You've got all different nationalities fighting in this war, defending Russia, and that's a good thing to see. And to all the Christians watching, just know that Vladimir Putin is he's one of the last defenders, the last bastion, and this is where this war that Russia's involved in, what started as a special military operation that Russia wanted to complete, is now becoming a war. It's becoming World War III, and it's a very dangerous time which humanity is entering. Almost, you could say, apocalyptic vibes about it.
Yeah. And I want to jump into that topic. So, Ukraine, my wife's from Ukraine. My grandparents are from mom's side, dad's side are from Ukraine. Ukraine was not like this 30 years ago. They were just how Russia is, different ethnicities, different, live together. Yes, there was horrible things that Joseph Stalin did, and he did target the Chechens and the Ukrainians with wanted to hunger them out. And my grandparents actually ended up in the Soviet gulags for their faith. That's how they migrated out of Ukraine. But what's happening yesterday, Zelensky shuts down the church. The West came in, told them, hey, you're not them. You're not those people, even though, yes, we are. I didn't even know there's a difference between a Russian and a Ukrainian until I was 17 years old. Someone explained it to me before I met my wife. But, the slight, tiny difference, but I thought it's just they're like, no, the history's a little different, but 99.9% the same. But the West comes in, they tell people, look, who you have thought you are forever, you're not them. Then they say the faith you've been practicing, right? That's not it. You're now this and that. They bring back fascism, Nazism, right? They betrayed their grandfathers and what they fought for. And now we see, Russia, whose grandfathers were fighting on the same side against Nazi Germany. Many of them. Yes, there are some Ukrainians who fought on the, but most of these guys, their grandfathers fought with the Red Army. Now the Russian grandchildren and the Ukrainian children are in each other's lands. And I want to, and it's sad. And I want to get to Kirk's. I'm not following it as much as you are, but how bad is it? The Ukrainian invasion into, the old borders, so to say. I mean, not from what I've heard, they're holding about 100 little towns, villages. They're like 100 kilometers in.
Yes. So the Ukrainian invasion of Kursk region is very significant. It's the first time that a Russian sovereign territory, undisputed territory, has been invaded by an enemy force since 1941, since Hitler and the Nazis attacked Russia. And in fact, the areas, the settlements, the locations which these battles now are taking place, the same place where in 1941, and then when the Germans were attacking Kursk, and then in 1943 when the Soviets counterattacked and defeated the Germans, this is the same place where these things are occurring. It's a very historic part of Russia, and it's already, as you could say, Russian heartland. We're not talking about Crimea. We're not talking about Zaporozhye or Donetsk or Lugansk or Kherson. We're talking about a region which is part of Russia, part of undisputed Russia, which the West recognizes as Russia. Now, to put this into perspective, the Ukrainian soldiers who are entering Kursk now, the only thing Ukrainian about them is their flesh and blood. Everything else about them, their uniforms, their boots, their rifles, their Humvees, their Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, their Max Pro armored trucks, their strikers, the tanks, everything. It's American, it's French, it's British. Just this morning, there was a French anti-aircraft system destroyed in the Kursk region by Russian forces. And for the last 2 weeks, every day we're seeing dozens and dozens and dozens of destroyed armored vehicles, Western vehicles, NATO vehicles. This is really actually a NATO invasion of the Kursk region. Because the most important advantage which the Ukrainians have over the Russians is that they use NATO live satellite data. It gives a very good and excellent advantage on the battlefield. And Russia didn't expect Ukraine to have this because Ukraine never had this. Russia expected to just get this over and done with very quickly. It was never intended to be a war. But of course, NATO has fully joined on the Ukrainian side. So the Ukrainians are not really fighting. When they say, oh, the Ukrainian army, it's not the Ukrainian army. It's 55 other countries with their advisors sitting in bunkers. And the way these NATO advisors conduct warfare is from the safety of a bunker with a computer screen pressing buttons. The combination of live satellite data and long-range missiles such as HIMARS missiles or Storm Shadow missiles, it's a very effective combination. Russia did not expect this. Yes, there have been huge Russian losses. Ukrainian losses are probably 5 times as high, but Russians are taking losses too. And this is becoming a very, very serious war for Russia. And the West doesn't understand that. You have to take your hat off to the Russian military and to Vladimir Putin, that they're fighting with one arm tied behind their back, where they're saying it's not a war, it's a special operation, so we're not going to go hard, we're not going to carpet bomb cities, we're not going to flatten everything, we're going to try and be as careful as possible. So it's like a surgical approach. They're trying to preserve Ukrainian infrastructure. I mean, the first thing Ukraine does when they enter the Kursk region is blow up bridges in that region, Russian bridges. And Russia could have done that from day one. The big Dnieper River, which you have, the river which divides Ukraine into 2 parts, there are still bridges operating on that river. There are still many things, many targets that Russia could take out. And it hasn't done that. It hasn't gone for the full war, total war approach. Ukraine is targeting with NATO drones, with NATO supplied drones, using NATO intelligence, using NATO satellite data. This is really, I'm repeating it again, but it's a really major factor. The fact that the West is giving all of this live satellite data. Why often Russians destroy or capture Ukrainian position, they find Starlink terminals. The Starlink gives them live footage. So it's like playing a computer game. You can see your enemy on the TV screen in front of you. You can see where they're walking. You can see where they're driving, right? That's the advantage that NATO has. What's the solution? I mean, Russia could send weapons into space and just detonate a nuke or 10 nukes or 50 nukes in space with shrapnel and just wipe out all the satellites or create a big problem up there in space. But is that what the West wants? Because the West is giving the Ukrainians an unfair advantage. And Russia's response is to keep going, keep fighting, recruit more men. And there's no forced recruitment in Russia. It's all volunteers. And Russian men are dying. Yes, they are. But they're dying heroically. And I've said this all the time. They're dying so Ukrainians can live. If Russia said, we don't want our soldiers to die, we'd rather Ukrainian civilians die, let's just bomb and flatten every single city. It'd be a different story, right? But Russia's got this military chivalry about it, this military tradition, this honor, this dignity. Yes, they're fighting. They know they're fighting up against 50 plus countries, but at least they maintain honor. They haven't behaved like Nazis because they don't want to kill Ukrainians. Russians don't get any pleasure from the fact that Ukrainians are dying. That's why it was such a limited special military operation. When just in the beginning of the special military operation in February 2022, if we look back as to how the Russians were conducting it, there were forward units driving in, no cover, no air cover, no nothing, just on trucks, because they thought it's going to be like in Crimea, where they're going to enter the towns and cities of Ukraine. People are going to greet them. And that would have happened if it wasn't for, again, NATO. Remember in the first days of the special operation, there were lots of Russian convoys getting hit by what they called Ukrainian strikes. It wasn't Ukrainian strikes. It was the Western military advisors, NATO officers, seeing Russian columns of tanks, of trucks, or whatever, on satellite live and launching missiles live and watching them die live. Right? How is that Ukraine fighting Russia? That's directly NATO fighting Russia. Russia doesn't do that. Russia are very careful. And that's the problem. So when people say, oh, Russia's weak, how have they allowed this? How have they allowed Ukraine to enter the Kursk region? And then people from the side say, oh, Russia must be weak. Russia's not weak. See, the West and a lot of Western observers misinterpret Russian kindness or Russian chivalry for weakness. They think Russia's weak. Russia's not weak. Russia's just incredibly, you could say, self-controlled. And Russia's being very chivalrous. They're risking Russia. They're risking Russian people, Russian men in particular, who are dying, so Ukraine can live, so Ukrainian infrastructure can remain intact. Just near the front lines, you've got Ukrainian cities, and they're full of civilians. They're full of people. Ukrainian soldiers go from the front lines back to the cities, and they live in hotels, and they go to restaurants, and they operate within the city. Right, so if you look at a normal war, what would you do? You destroy everything, right? You leave nothing for the enemy. This is not a normal war. This is a war where the West is taking full advantage of Russians' limited response. And people in Russia are getting sick of this. People in Russia are saying, just launch tactical nukes. Let's just wipe out a few Ukrainian cities. That's not what I'm saying. This is what taxi drivers and bus drivers and school teachers and veterans and students are saying in Russia. Launch the tactical nukes. Enough is enough. That's what people are saying. When we talk about tactical nukes, I don't mean the massive nukes, I mean small ones. Russia's got plenty of them, but so does the United States. And the attack on the Kursk region is an opportunistic attack by Ukraine. Russia did not expect Ukraine to actually breach Russian territory proper. It's all sort of accepted and known that for years now, the fighting has been in those areas, the disputed areas, the southern regions of Ukraine, which were always part of Russia, where there's a 80%, 90% Russian-speaking population. That's where the Russian front lines are. That's where the Russian troops are. That's where the Surovikin line is, where the Russians successfully defended against the counter-offensive of Ukraine using Abrams tanks, British Challenger tanks. Nothing. They couldn't do anything about it. Russia won. So, and this is something that I actually said to the Russians, to my friends, to my connections over there. I said, don't fight the enemy where the enemy is. Fight the enemy where the enemy is not. And this is exactly what the Ukrainians have done. Instead of launching this counteroffensive at Russian lines, at Russian army, at the Russian positions, they've been sneaky and they've launched this little invasion into the Kursk region, which is a civilian region. You mentioned, Vlad, that yes, the Ukrainians claim there's about 100 settlements they've occupied so far. Well, we're not talking about big cities here. We're talking about little settlements, little villages, fields, open fields, forests. There's nothing there, really. There's no strategic value. There were no Russian positions there. It's not like the Ukrainians fought their way through the Kursk region. Caught the Russians by surprise. The Russians just simply didn't believe or expect or intend that Ukraine is going to use a NATO-equipped army to go into Russia. No one could have thought that's possible because it's absurd. Because by the Russian military doctrine, which is what Russia lives by or supposed to live by, if that happens, that means we have to declare war, and we have to, when we declare war, we use all available means on the table, including nuclear weapons. Russia still has not declared war. Ukraine still has not declared war on Russia. Neither country has declared war on each other. And when we see in the news, the Ukrainians are saying, oh, look how good we are, look how hopeless the Russians are, we've taken 100 settlements in Kursk, we've done this, we've done that. What have you done? You've got Ukrainian soldiers in highly maneuverable vehicles, by the way, such as Australian Bushmaster vehicles, which was destroyed this week in Kursk, other Western supplied vehicles, just driving through the region. And it's a large region. You can't have Russian soldiers everywhere, especially when they're not expecting it. And then they rock up to a little town, they stick a Ukrainian flag on it, they take a photo in front of a supermarket or a video for TikTok, and they say, look at us, here we are, we've occupied Russia. And this goes viral on social media, and everyone thinks Ukrainians have taken over. But how are they entrenched? Are they holding down these places? No. Are the Russians coming to kick them out? Yes. Are the Russians kicking them out? Yes. Ukraine has, just in these last 2 weeks, which this Kursk invasion has been going, Ukraine has already lost more than 6,000 soldiers, and a lot of their best units they sent there. Best units, very well equipped, with all this NATO gear. For what? Okay, they've done a great PR exercise. It's a good publicity stunt to give hope to the Ukrainian side and the Western backers. They think they're winning. They think they're doing something. Great optics for the Ukrainians. I agree. Which is, I said Russia should do something like this. Instead of fighting on the front lines where it's no man's land, where it's head-to-head attrition, like World War I style, trenches and artillery, which is what's been going on since November 2022. The front lines haven't really moved, plus minus 30, 40 kilometers either side. But it's just been this meat grind of people dying, fighting each other. And so the Ukrainians opened a new front. They opened a new theater. They attacked the Kursk region. Now, in the last 24 hours, there have been skirmishes and tank battles on the Bryansk border, which is north of Kursk region. So they're opening up, expanding all along the Russian-Ukrainian border. There's only a matter of time, looking at the map, that you see that there's a front line, but there's also then a Russian-Ukrainian border, which goes all the way up to Belarus. And there hasn't been any fighting on there since the beginning. Now it looks like we're escalating. Why are we escalating? I thought we were supposed to be talking about negotiations. I thought we were supposed to be talking about peace. That's what Viktor Orban of Hungary was saying. That's what Fico of Slovakia was saying. That's what Trump has been saying. That's what the Chinese have been saying. But see, NATO doesn't want peace. And when the Biden administration is in its final days, soon to be replaced by the Kamala Harris administration, because I'm sorry to disappoint all of the MAGA and Trump supporters out there, I don't think you guys can do it. Simply, you do have the votes. Trump does have the support, but you have to understand you're going to be backstabbed and tricked and manipulated.
Correct.
There's going to be voter fraud, and Kamala's going to win. And she's going to stand up in front of the nation, and she's going to repeat a speech same speech that she's been repeating for 15 years, the same words of a teletexter. She's even worse than Biden. And you're going to lose, and there's nothing you can do about it, because last time they stole the election from Trump, there was nothing you could do about it. Big tech said no one can talk about that. I remember on my YouTube channel, I accidentally mentioned, just as a passing comment during a 1-hour stream, that the election was stolen from Trump, and they suspended my channel in Australia. And I thought, I wasn't even keen or interested in that topic, but that's how guarded big tech is, and they work in cahoots. Big tech, big pharma, and the military-industrial complex, and that's who's running the United States. It's not Biden, it's not Kamala, and of course, sorry to disappoint, but I think that Trump is not going to win. Although it'd be great to see him win. Why is Trump not going to win? Because Trump has already said, I'll stop the war. I'll make Zelensky stop. I'll negotiate. I know Putin, I know Zelensky. This war is too good for business. Look at the share price of Lockheed. Look at the share price of all the big Raytheon and Boeing, all the arms supplies. It's going through the roof. There's billions and billions of dollars of weapons every week being sent or destroyed or replaced. Don't forget, it's not only the weapons that are being destroyed in Ukraine or being used in Ukraine. It's the orders, the replacement orders, and it's all the other Western countries now who have become paranoid, like Australia, because of this war. They become paranoid, so they're increasing their weapons orders. Australia has spent $365 billion ordering submarines. They're ordering HIMARS systems. They're ordering cruise missiles. They're ordering everything because they're freaking out now. And this is great for business, this war. Unfortunately, the result is that Orthodox Christians, Slavs, Ukrainians, and Russians are killing each other. It's actually probably more accurate to say Russians are killing each other. And the West is laughing, and the West is happy. And the West is supplying more weapons. And that's what we can't forgive the West for. And this is what they do everywhere. They turn Iraqis on Iranians. They turn Palestinians on Israelis. They turn North Koreans on South Koreans. They turn South Vietnamese on North Vietnamese. And they don't care. As long as they're making money, as long as bombs are being dropped. And then they'll do that for 4 or 5 years. Then they'll move on to the next place. And before they leave destruction and death and millions of people and casualties. And this is another scenario which the West has created. Don't forget, Vladimir Putin did everything not to start any conflict. He waited and waited and waited. He refused since 2014. And many Russians, like staunch Russian patriots, even myself, I was saying, as soon as 2014, this all started, Crimea, Russia should have just gone all the way. The city of Kharkov was ready. Odessa was ready. Mariupol was ready. Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, everyone was waiting for Russia Russian tanks to pull up. And people were riding with Russian flags. People were dusting off the Russian flags from their garages, from their basements. And the Russians never came because the Russians stopped after Crimea because the West convinced Russia. Stop. And then the Russians started slowly, unofficially, quietly supporting the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. But in the meantime, the West convinced Russia, don't go any further. Don't take any more of Ukraine. Don't do any more referendums. And Russia believed the West. And Putin admitted this year, he admitted he was tricked. He was fooled. Because all the West wanted to do was stop Russia. And in the meantime, they used 8 years, the Minsk agreements and Merkel, they used that time, 8 years, to pump Ukraine full of weapons, to build huge fortified positions in Donetsk. I mean, it took the Russians 9 years to kick the Ukrainians out of Avdiivka, which is on the western part of the city of Donetsk. 9 years. Could you imagine what kind of fortifications and underground bunkers and all this was built? And they invested billions of dollars into Ukraine. Russia was fooled. Russia was tricked. It's not my words. Putin admitted it. He said, we'll never trust the West again. So at least now the Russia won't trust the West again, which is the good news. And no country should trust the West. No country should trust America. What happens to leaders who trust America? People like Gaddafi. That's what happens. Out. Unfortunately, yeah, you can't do business with the devil. And America, sorry to say, but America is the devil. I'm not saying American people. I'm not saying, I lived in America.
No, you're absolutely right. Because look at Ukraine. Ukraine's the money laundering capital of the world. I mean, Kerry's son, Paul Pelosi's, son. Who else is a bunch of these politicians? All their kids are working. Hunter Biden working on natural gas companies in the Ukraine, right?
Yeah,
it's just corruption.
Guys, 1 second. I'm gonna take myself off the screen for like 30 seconds. Continue this topic. I still hear you. I got it. I'll be right back. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, Aussie, it's incredible because it's like, I heard that they had bioweapon labs right on the border of Russia, the Ukraine, in other words, and that's where they were brewing up the next pandemics. Have you heard anything like that?
Yeah, I report on that as well extensively in the beginning of the conflict. That was one of Russia's objectives, to neutralize the Western biolabs. They were conducting experiments. Unfortunately, since 2014, after the Maidan coup d'etat, which removed the legitimate Ukrainian government and replaced them with a pro-Western puppet government of Poroshenko and now Zelensky. Since then, Ukraine has been for sale, everything for sale. Everything you can imagine. Land, people, women, children, plasma, adrenochrome, body parts, organs. It's a very scary place. It's a sickening thing. It's terrible to consider that. For us as Russians, it's heartbreaking because these are our brothers. This is our brotherly people. We consider them ours. And they've allowed themselves to be exploited by the West. European, American brothels are full of Ukrainian women. There's a booming child trafficking industry from Ukraine. They're trafficking children to people in the UK, in the EU. Everything's for sale. Medical companies, big pharma. That's where they conduct their experiments. They pay Ukrainian people peanuts, and they get them to inject themselves with all sorts of experimental drugs. And that's what these bioweapons labs were doing. They were testing new bioweapons. They were testing new vaccines. They were testing all sorts of new products from pharmaceutical companies. Because in Ukraine, there's no rules. They're not allowed to do this type of testing in the United States. It's illegal. Right. They can't do this testing in the West. And so they've been doing everything in Ukraine. And Ukraine has become this cesspool of all this corruption and these corrupt concepts. It's really sad. And that's one of the reasons why, one of the many reasons which Russia did started its special operation. And this is what the Nazis did. What were the Nazis famous for? For experiments on humans, for all these concentration camps and these Nazi scientists. That's what Ukraine is doing. That's what they have been doing.
Identical.
When Russia said they want to denazify Ukraine, this is what they mean. They denazify all of these Nazi elements. This area, the land of Ukraine, it's soaked in the blood of Russian soldiers. Right? Russia earned that land. Russian troops marched all the way to Berlin, and they liberated Berlin, and they occupied East Germany up until 1988, 1989. And this is, we gave East Germany back. Russia removed its troops from East Germany, removed its troops from all the Eastern Bloc countries.
Right.
All these countries were built up and occupied by the Soviet Union. That's why they have so many weapons, which unfortunately all these weapons are now being given to the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians are very fortunate because all of those Soviet weapons are the same weapons that Ukraine has. So all of the Soviet weapon stocks that were built up in Eastern Europe, cynically, are now being used to kill Russians. It's terrible. That's just the way history is. And the point is that Russia earned Ukraine. Russia earned that land. It was a huge mistake in 1991 when that land was signed away. It was a terrible tragedy that the Soviet Union was broken up into all little pieces. And that was a successful operation of the CIA. The CIA infiltrated the Russian leadership. There were staunch Russian Soviet patriots who tried to stop this from happening. Hardline generals and others. They weren't successful. And the pro-Western advisors who got their way into there, Gorbachev and Yeltsin, they sold the whole country. And this is a tragedy that Ukraine was ever allowed to slip into Western hands. And now it's being used. Ukraine is being used against Russia. And this is a great scenario for the West, a great scenario for America, terrible scenario for us.
And I heard that the Ukraine has tactical nukes. In other words, there's nuclear material in the Ukraine, and they're probably going to use it when they're desperate enough. That's probably why Putin is kind of slow playing this, is because he knows that they have, they got some stuff.
Well, Ukraine is very corrupt, so you would expect if something can be bought or sold, it's probably available in Ukraine.
Right.
And Ukraine was the jewel of the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union invested a lot into Ukraine, huge weapons investments. And till this day, they've got massive weapons dumps, supplies, caches, because the Soviet Union calculated that Ukraine would always be part of Russia, and they built up huge bunkers everywhere. Ukraine was supposed to have been stripped of nuclear weapons in 1991, but who knows if there's a few floating around. All you need is one small tactical nuke to cause trouble, and Russia had a lot of them. Soviet Union had a lot of them. They can be launched from artillery. They can be launched from conventional means. You don't necessarily have to have an ICBM to launch this nuke. You can launch it with a howitzer, for example, on the battlefield. So it's a difficult situation. The West is to blame. The blood of the Ukrainian people and the Russian people are directly, squarely, as a result of the United States and their foreign policy. And in the future, these huge Ukrainian cemeteries with all these dead Ukrainian soldiers, in the future there'll be memorial plaques built there, and they will say these Ukrainians were killed by NATO. They believed in NATO. They believed in NATO's promises, and they went and died for NATO. And most of them, by the way, were forced. These Ukrainians aren't dying because they want to die. They're dying because they're being arrested. Fathers, husbands, sons, they're being arrested from the streets and dragged into battle. And at the orders of the US. The US is now trying to force Ukraine to change the laws to forcibly recruit 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds. At the moment, they're not allowed to do that. But now they're changing the laws because they want to completely genocide the country. And then you have BlackRock, who's looking to invest into Ukraine. They're offering $500 billion. They're saying, we'll buy everything. Well, isn't that convenient? All of a sudden, BlackRock rears its ugly head in Ukraine. So they're trying to depopulate Ukraine, get rid of the population, because Ukrainian land is very, very fertile. Ukrainian land, black earth, black soil. That's why everybody wanted it. That's why Hitler wanted it. The Germans used to load up railway cars with black soil from Ukraine and take it back to Germany because it was so fertile. Ukraine has a lot of natural resources. Strategically, it's an excellent position. Unfortunately, everything is being done the hard way. Russia was just too trusting. That's only my only criticism of Russia. Russia's only a mistake. And this is a mistake that Vladimir Putin has admitted and confirmed, that Russia trusted the West. Russia should never have trusted the West. This would never have happened. Shouldn't have trusted the West in 1991. The Soviet Union should never have collapsed. The Berlin Wall should never have come down. And I say that because look at the Germans now. supplying German tanks, Leopard tanks, Taurus missiles against us, against Russia. Hang on a second. It was only 35, 36, 37 years ago that our troops were occupying your country. We threw the keys back to you and we said, "Here, have your country back. We're leaving." How nice were the Russians? Big mistake. You know, the Germans should understand this. And I think the German population, especially the East German population, or geographically, the former East Germany, they understand this and they don't view Russia as an enemy. That's why you see a lot of Germans marching against this war, marching against their government policy of supplying weapons to Zelensky, because they know that they're on the wrong side of history. And to all the patriots watching, if you're an American patriot and you're against Zelensky and you're pro-Putin, good on you. Hats off to you, because you're on the right side of history. It doesn't matter. Excuse me. It doesn't matter what happens. Russia will win anyway. Russia will win. It doesn't matter if another 1 million soldiers have to die. Because you know what? Unfortunately, that's what the West wants. But Russia is not going to stand down. Russians don't back down. Russians aren't going to give up, or they're not going to give in. They're going to fight. And Russian men will go and die. And it's terrible. You see now Russian men dying, and the West is just sending plastic and metal and drones and missiles, killing Russians. It's not fair. It's like Russians are trying to be honorable. The West is not. The West are being as manipulative and sneaky and dishonorable as possible, using all these tactics. The Russians are saying, "Here we are on the battlefield. Come and fight us." What do? They go and attack a civilian region in Kursk where there's no troops. And then they say, "Oh, look, we're winning. We're defeating the Russians." It's all going to be over very shortly. Kursk will be liberated and cleaned from all of these fascist invaders. But what the Kursk invasion has done, it's actually now, it's unified Russia, stronger than ever. People are rallying behind the president. If anyone, even in Russia, was a little bit concerned or on the fence about the war, do we support it, do we not? Now it's clear that Russia is the victim. It's not Ukraine is the victim now. Russia's the victim. Russia's the one being invaded. So Ukraine are losing that victim card, aren't they? They're losing their sympathy card.
Narrative, yeah.
The Germans have said, we're not going to supply any more money to Ukraine because this wasn't part of the deal. You're invading Russia now. We're not going to be part of that. We didn't sign for that. We didn't give permission for our weapons and our money to be used for that. You told us that you guys are struggling, you need help because the Russians are going to annihilate you and they're going to invade you and take over Ukraine. But we've been misled. So Western support, Hungary, and hats off to Hungary and Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary, they're always saying the correct things. They said that Hungary denounced the Ukrainian attack on Kursk. Now, Hungary is a NATO member. It's an EU member. They actually have the EU presidency this year. And they've denounced the Ukrainian attack. China denounced the Ukrainian attack on Kursk. China said, well, why are you expanding the war? I thought you wanted negotiations. I thought you wanted to stop this. So it makes sense that Ukraine is, Zelensky's regime is trying to grab a piece of Russian territory off guard, like a surprise attack, occupy some land quickly to maybe strengthen their position in negotiating. Maybe now the Ukrainians will say, well, we'll give you back this place, this part, if you give us back that part or whatever. But the Russians have responded even worse. They've said, guess what? Now there's not going to be any negotiating. Because you did that, forget about it. We were so close to negotiating. Trump was talking about it. The Chinese, the Indians, all of these countries around the world were involved in let's stop this. Let's stop this madness because it's not going anywhere. It's just killing. It's dying for nothing. People dying, killing each other. Christian people killing Christian people. It's not good. While the bankers and the heads and the executives of Western arms companies get richer and richer and their share prices get higher and higher. They don't care how many other people die as long as they're making money. Now we've taken a step backwards from peace with this Kursk invasion. And this is what you call the result of the Biden administration in their final days. They're like a dangerous, like a wounded dog in the corner before it dies. It's just biting and acting irrationally. And this is what Biden is at the moment, his regime. Of course, they have facilitated this attack on Kursk. Of course, they have given permission. Of course, they provided satellite data, intel, these HIMARS missile systems. These are all weapon systems and missile systems which are integrated into the NATO broader weapon systems. They're all controlled from the NATO base in Ramstein, Germany. These aren't Ukrainians destroying Russians and winning. This is NATO. And Russia didn't sign up to fight NATO. You want to fight NATO? Okay, let's be fair. NATO wants to join the war and openly fight against Russia. Well, guess what? Russia has friends too. Let's invite China. Let's invite North Korea. You know, North Korea has offered Putin, we'll send you 1 million soldiers. We'll send you everything. Just whatever you know. Just let us know. Iran has said, we'll get in there. Whatever you need us to do. How many countries around the world, African countries, Middle Eastern countries, everyone is saying to Russia, we'll come and help you. Whatever you need. Because they know Russia is one country, one up against 55. Not up against 2 or 5 or 10, up against 55. We're up against the best of what the West has. And guess what? Russia's holding the line. In fact, you could say Russia is winning against the West because they're showing that Russia is able to hold the line against the whole West combined together, against everybody. And that's why so many countries around the world actually support Russia, because they see Russia as being the only country in the last 70 years that's able to say no to the Americans and actually hold the line. And they haven't turned Russia into a Syria or a Libya or a Vietnam or a Korea. Like they did. They got away with this everywhere. And they're not getting away with it this time. The Chinese defense top officials are now in Moscow at the moment, discussing with Russia, close collaboration. But I've said this for about a year now, and I think eventually it's going to happen. But I suggested that Russia should offer China a slice of Ukraine, perhaps a port on the Black Sea, like Odessa. And they could give it to China under a lease deal, 99-year lease, and say, this is for you. You can have your port, because the Chinese love to trade. They love commerce. They love business. For them to have a port in the middle of Europe actually benefits Russia, because then they can trade with Europe through the Chinese port and avoid sanctions. Russia needs to give incentive to China. Ukraine's big enough to hand out a few slices of Ukraine. In exchange for what? In exchange for the huge Chinese manufacturing potential. This war now is all about drones. Who's got more drones? Who's got more missiles? Who's got more artillery? 95% of casualties are from artillery, drones, and missiles, not from hand-to-hand combat. It's very rare you see tank duels or armored personnel carrier duels or soldiers storming trenches and shooting each other. It happens, but it's rare. Most of the casualties are not from that. Now, guess which country has more manufacturing potential, more manufacturing output capacity than all of the other countries in the world combined? China. The only country that could overnight say to Russia, right, we're switching 10,000 factories to producing drones for the Russian military. It's China. If China wanted to, they could produce 100,000, 200,000 drones a week. They could produce that many drones for the Russians that the sky in Ukraine would be like a black sky, like a flock of crows flying. Could you imagine? Like in the movies. China can do that. It's not fantasy or sci-fi. China is capable of doing that. They've got the geographic advantage. They've got the Russian Trans-Siberian Railway, which links China to Russia, through Russia, all the way to the front lines. If China really wanted to get behind Russia, they could. But China is saying, they're warning the West. They're saying, stop this conflict. It's not good for business. Not good for anyone. First and foremost, China is all about business. That's why they haven't attacked Taiwan yet, because that's not good for business. Chinese are planning not for the next year or for in 2 years. They're planning for in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, and 200 years down the track. They're very clever. They're very strong, and they own their country. Unlike the US, the US is in debt, huge debt. The US doesn't own its country anymore. They're in debt to China. China owns the US. Now, if Chinese manufacturing was to back Russia, Chinese missile manufacturing, Chinese are making thousands and thousands of missiles every week. They're outperforming, outproducing everybody else everywhere around the world. Now, if China says, that's it, we're backing Russia, in the same way as NATO is backing Ukraine, well, guess what's going to happen? The fighting is not going to be in Kursk, on the Kursk border. The fighting is going to be on the Polish-Ukrainian border. Everything will change. So the West is playing a dangerous game. You've got disorder in the UK. You've got civil problems at home in the US. You've got assassination attempts on presidential candidates. The United States is becoming a dysfunctional country. People don't want to even join your military anymore in the United States. They're giving up. People aren't happy. You've got all these problems all around the world, right? Russia can fight the war in many different ways. Russia withdraws all goodwill because of what the NATO is doing, because of what the West is doing. Russia withdraws all goodwill around the world that Russia used to have to help the United States, to combat terrorism, to combat extremism, to combat renegade regimes or warlords in Africa or wherever, in anywhere around the world. Before, America and Russia used to work together on this. Russia's saying, we're not going to help you anymore. And by the way, anyone needs missiles, we'll give them to you. Oh, what's that? Yemen needs missiles. Oh, what's that? Some Africans need missiles. Oh, what's that? Someone else needs weapons. Yeah, no worries, we'll give them to you. You know why? Because you're giving Ukraine everything. Why don't we arm your enemies? Isn't that only fair? Right? If Russia starts arming all of the enemies of the United States. I know you guys don't like to hear this because I'm sure you guys are both American patriots, but it's only fair, isn't it? And that's what the United States risks by arming this madman.
Our government's a piece of shit. And I think Vlad knows that. I know that. It's not the people, right? It's always the governments. That's what I've learned. But yeah, what you're saying is fascinating. You're exactly right. Why not go arm these different countries? Absolutely.
And even what has happened in the last 3.5 years, there's a lot of moderate Democrats who are voting Trump, who just hated his guts. I know 3 people who voted for Hillary. These are people that I personally know besides the stories and the emails I get. You know, people are, I started watching you and now I'm voting for Trump. These are people who hated his guts and are voting for him. Like, these are the last people you think. And I'm like, if I know 3, how many are nationwide? And I want to kind of backpedal. Am I like 100% positive Trump's going to win this? No. In a free and fair election, landslide. But there's today, the Supreme Court ruled that Arizona has to see photo ID when registering voters and voting. We have the state of Georgia where they changed all these rules and secured their elections. The Democrats are freaking out. We have the state of Virginia where miraculously in 2021 they had held a special election, and this super popular incumbent Democrat backed by Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden loses to a non-paid or bought for former pastor who left pastoring for a while to run for governor, wins by a miracle, just cleaned the voter rolls, just under 100,000 voters removed from the voter roll list. Trump is, and this has been a Democrat state forever. Trump is leading Kamala in that state. And so there isn't like this big change that's hitting the news or they hide it. But it's someone like me who follows election very closely. Am I like, they're going to try to do whatever they can. But if Trump has a good chance, he hasn't had such a good chance like now. Plus, with all the people that left, he needs less states, less swing states. California and New York, so many people left that they each lost 4 electoral votes each. Who got those votes? Texas and Florida, guaranteed Trump states. So there are 10-point swing states that he needed. Now, he needs 1 less. And then there's, and there's the biggest factor that I always go back to. With what we have suffered in the last 3.5 years, I don't see how God doesn't step in after all the prayers. We have the J6 political prisoners being tortured. We have abortions right now. The DNC, sick people. The RNC was opened with Billy Graham's son was there to say a sermon and to pray for the nation. They're doing abortions, and so is it a guaranteed? No, but right now, his position, there are several states like Wisconsin, the lady that actually bragged about, you remember Wisconsin's spike in the middle of the night for Joe Biden? She's out. She was fired and she's been replaced by a conservative man who's actually working with Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, to secure elections. We have Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court actually ruled a couple weeks ago, not the Supreme Court, but their Supreme Court of the state, when it comes to election laws, they ruled with the RNC against the DNC. So there's these little shifts that are going to make it harder for them, to do what they did in 2020 and what they want to do now. So I think, but we have something that they don't. We have truth, and we have God on our side. And by the words of Putin, if God is on your side and if truth is on your side, victory is with you. And am I like sitting? Some people are like, Trump's going to win. It's going to be a landslide in a free and fair election. Landslides. He did in a landslide last year. In 2020. But we need to pray. We need to be vigilant. We need to get as many people right. If everyone does their little part. But like Kennedy, the third party candidate, he's dropping out tomorrow and endorsing Donald Trump and joining forces with him to make sure he gets elected. And he's got nearly 4.5% of the vote. And if he can talk his, majority of his people, and that's a huge advantage. Democrats are going wild today on social media over it. They're freaking out. Yeah, and Kennedy's going to drop out tomorrow in Arizona in the morning, and he's going to be at Trump's rally speaking on behalf of Trump in the evening. And Matt is going to be there.
I'll be there.
Yeah, and so, but we're in a very interesting time. We are in, and look, in just 3.5 years, look where we are. 4 years ago, 2019, 2018, the world was calm. There were issues here and there, but not like this. Nothing like this. This is, it's end times. I don't believe we're in the end times, but Jesus does talk about the beginning of the end times. I believe we're in the beginning of the end. Начало концов. Right? The Russian scripture says it. It's the beginning of the end. It's not the end yet, but these things are churned into motion. We're seeing tyrannical governments. We're seeing all this happening. And what do you think? For my last question, BRICS. This is a big one, BRICS. I think they will topple, EU. They have more people. GDP, if I'm not mistaken, is there, or if not bigger. They're backing their money with gold and silver. They want to, Putin just said last week, they want to, make their own parliament. That's huge. They have India.
BRICS is real. That's the difference. BRICS is real. And the United States, a lot of it is fake. It is fake. The country is running on debt. The United States is no longer doing manufacturing. They don't make anything. They don't make money. What's the United States economy based on? What is the European economy based on? This is where China has been playing the long game. This is where they win in the end. So everyone all around the world, Australia, United States, Europe, everyone closed their factories down, moved everything to China because it cost $1 a day or $2 a day for labor. Well, guess what? Those people in China who 40, 50 years ago, the West was paying $2 a day, the tables have turned. It's the Chinese now who are becoming the millionaires and billionaires because they're the ones who hold all the manufacturing. Everything is produced there. Electronics, cars, iPhones, microchips, everything, right? They've taken over the initiative on the planet. BRICS is real. If Russia's fighting a war, it's because Russia's spending real money to fight a war. That's the difference. If America's fighting a war, America's just fighting a war on credit and adding to the $40 trillion. Just adding and growing and growing and growing. There's another billion here, another 100 billion there, another 300 billion there. It doesn't make any difference. No one cares. No one's going to pay that back ever. Yeah. Russia's still fighting a war with cash. Russia's fighting a war because it can afford to. And of course, Russia has the advantage of natural resources. BRICS countries all complement each other. China has huge manufacturing advantage. The geography of BRICS countries really helps the BRICS countries. If a big war breaks out in the future, sea lanes, shipping lanes will have a big impact. I mean, countries like Australia, who are an island, they'll be cut off from the rest of the world if the shipping lanes are closed. What's going to happen to Australia, countries like Australia? when they've picked the wrong side, when they have to make a decision. Do you go with BRICS, or do you go with this fledgling alliance of Western states who hate each other anyway? BRICS is the future. And by the way, the population. BRICS is like 5 or 6 billion people out of 8 billion people. Whereas the Western countries, the G7, is 700 million people. Birth rates declining in the G7, increasing in BRICS. Suicide rates increasing in the G7, decreasing in BRICS. Religion increasing in BRICS. Atheism increasing in G7. You see, all of the signs are there of a failing empire. Every empire has its day. Every dog has its day. What's going to happen to the West? We saw how quick the situation can change in the United States with Trump's attempted assassination. What if that bullet had hit him? It was a few millimeters away from killing him. If it killed him, there's every chance to expect or to foresee a civil war scenario in the United States. Now, if a civil war kicks off in the United States, it's going to make every other civil war around the world look like kindergarten.
Yeah.
Because the United States, every second household has a few rifles, there's a few shotguns, there's a few machine guns.
Or that's one scenario. Or the second scenario is it's going to be over soon. There's one party that is super anti-self-defense. Then they don't have them. Then it's not the conservative side. You will never find a liberal or a Democrat, like maybe 1 in 1,000 who actually does. But when it comes to conservatives, 105 out of 100. I want to get your take on this that you mentioned, Trump's assassination. Trump's assassination attempt was on July 13th. This is April 8th.
Coming out, and that's whenever I saw Trump.
No, this is a man of God, preacher, who, как можно сказать, пророк. You know, he hears from the Lord, a prophet. I don't know how good you can hear, but
Coming out, and that's whenever I saw Trump, and I saw a red wave coming out of Michigan, and
Right.
then I saw Oklahoma, and there was embers of people. And
wait, where's this one?
And he was
Here.
weeping before.
Here we go.
Execution would come on him through. People say he's an attempt on it.
Okay, here we go.
Up, and then I saw an attempt on his life. This bullet flew by his ear, and it came so close to his head that it busted his eardrum. And I saw he fell to his knees during this time frame.
So he goes on to say how he sees the blood, he falls in his knees. Like this dude, even like, right? And it's like this dude, like I mean, if you hear his whole 2 hour, one day start asking him questions, they're like left ear, right ear. He's like right ear, and he's like, it's like the tip, and he's like, you know, he's like, I can only tell you like in many words what I saw in a split second in prayer. And it's like, you know, you could think it's like, you know, if it's some big guy who maybe has money, you know, BlackRock song, it's some dude that lives in Kentucky, pastors a small church, you know, was doing a church YouTube channel and just talks about it. It does not go viral. Barely any people see it. But on July 13th, millions of this video just whoo, and I'm looking at the date, upload date, April 8th. That's just like, it's crazy. And so we have God on our side, you know, and like you were saying, you know, there's civil war and all this, but from an outside perspective, Kamala wins, Trump wins. Do you think we can go around? Because I don't think the Patriots are going to let it go if they do what they did in 2020. And the liberals, the base, hates Trump so much. They're willing to do anything to make sure Trump doesn't serve another 4 years. I mean, Congress is openly talking about on January 6th, they are going to stop Trump's inauguration. They're actually opening what's his name? Kinzinger? Matt, what's his name?
Adam Kinzinger.
Yes. He was at a university 3 weeks ago, and he openly said, I believe January 6th, we're going to need more guards than we did last time because we're actually going to tell the people no. he's unqualified, and we're going to use, I think he said, like the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, where Congress can disqualify a president-elect who won.
Yeah,
I mean,
Jamie Raskin said the same thing.
Oh, so, yeah, and I heard Kinzinger say this. So they're already planning. Trump's going to win, but here's what we're going to do. We're gonna, we're not going to let him in that White House. And so I know from our side, people, dude, there's militias, huge militias nationwide.
They're trying to Star Wars. It's almost like the same thing they're doing in the Ukraine. They're trying to brew the tensions. They want war. That's their end game.
Why can't they just give their life to Jesus and stop this? You know what I mean? It'd be good if everyone believes.
Why can't we all just get along?
Yeah. So I want to. How long you think you're? Just let's wrap it up with this. How long you think you're gonna be stuck at the embassy for? What do you think? Any way that we can help, or the viewers? Maybe there's someone we can blow up their phone, the viewers.
Look, I've been locked in the consulate for more than 600 days. It's okay. I'm not complaining. The main thing is I can work. And in the informational war, which is very important, it's as important as the war on the battlefield, sometimes more important. It doesn't matter what happens on the battlefield. It matters what people think happened. And the informational war is real. It's serious. And my main aim or concern or priority is to be part of the struggle against the pro-NATO propaganda, which is attacking Russia. And it's very heavily tilted in their favor. But the truth is on our side. And that's where the social media users are en masse actually switching to the Russian side. You think back to the beginning of the conflict when it started, the special operation. People with Ukrainian flags in their profiles. All those people have removed Ukrainian flags now. You see a lot more people with pro-Russian sentiment now.
I was one of those. I was actually one of those. I didn't know anything about this conflict. I was just like, man, my wife's country's being invaded. But a few months later, and now she's like, man, Zelensky needs to go. He ruined my country. And
a few months later of listening to Aussie Cossack, and you've been converted to the
a little bit, yeah, a little bit of Aussie, yeah.
Well, that's okay. Look, as long as you're honest, and it's okay. To withstand the huge propaganda that was there supporting Ukraine, it's like the current thing. First, they tell you everyone gets the vaccine, everyone goes and gets it. Then everyone realizes it's a bad idea, or whatever it is. This is the same thing. The masses following the narrative, and I think we've been very successful in countering the narrative because the Russian government officially hasn't been involved in that. They've left it to people. All of us out there who are free to speak and free to broadcast and free to research and publish whatever information we like. And the war is changing. If you look around on what's happening on social media platforms, for example, on Twitter and other places, people are en masse saying no to Zelensky. People are sick of Zelensky. People don't necessarily love Putin, or maybe actually a lot do. Sorry, a lot actually do love Putin. But people are sick of Zelensky, genuinely sick of him. And they're starting to understand and realize that Zelensky is not the hero that the West was trying to sell to them. So it's his fault that this is all happening. He needs to be removed. And I'll remain here for as long as it takes. I don't want to risk falling into the custody of the Australian authorities because they can easily just send me to prison for a very extended, long period of time. I don't care. Like, I'm almost in prison now where I am here, but here at least I can broadcast. I can be part of that informational war, and they can't stop me. The most frustrating thing for the authorities is they can't grab me. This is a diplomatic building. They can't enter. They can't enter the territory. If they did something like that, it would be a massive scandal. It would be the Russians would just enter the Australian embassy in Moscow, for example. So no one's going to risk that, especially over some guy from YouTube named Aussie Cossack. Right? They're not going to risk two countries having such a huge dilemma. So I'm officially classified as an asylum seeker. Vladimir Putin awarded Russian citizenship to me via a presidential decree, which is very great. It's good. Thank you, Vladimir Putin. And it shows that Russians don't give up on their own. It shows that Russians take in their own. They look after them. And that's why a lot of people want to move to Russia. A lot of people in the West are actually thinking of moving to Russia. And a lot of people have been. recently. You know, the media tells you Russia's fighting a war. People are moving to Russia from the West because they know the truth is on the Russian side. And as for the American situation, good luck to Trump. Hopefully he can win. He deserves to win. He should win. But they'll try everything possible, every trick in the book. So we'll speak again. And thank you, Matt, and thank you, Vlad.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, Aussie Cossack, his Twitter page will be down below in the description. Go follow him. I mean, that's where you go for all the latest updates. Again, Aussie,
thank you. Total honor.
Thank you. Likewise, honor. Thank you.